Boa tarde a todos, muito obrigada pela vossa presença. É um gosto poder estar convosco nesta sessão, neste webinar, promovido pelo projeto Bioeconomia Sustentável, projeto integrado da bioeconomia, que vou apresentar muito brevemente em seguida, e termos connosco o prestigiado orador Mike Redwood. O Mike Redwood é um especialista da área do couro, trabalhou durante muitos anos com empresas do couro, foi também professor convidado da Universidade de Northampton, em Inglaterra. Neste momento é o responsável e administrador do Centro para a Conservação da Natureza no Reino Unido. Trabalha com muitas empresas ainda, quer na área da inovação, quer da aplicação e do marketing. E neste momento, sobretudo, dedica-se a ajudar a Leather Naturally. Eu vou iniciar o compartilhamento da apresentação. Aguardamos mais uns segundos. Vamos começar então com uma brevíssima apresentação deste projeto Bioeconomia nestes tópicos. Um pequeno contexto, os objetivos do nosso cluster como um todo, não são os objetivos só do projeto, é um objetivo do nosso cluster. Porquê escolhemos a bioeconomia? Porque este é um projeto direcionado para a bioeconomia, a aposta nos novos biomateriais, no couro e no afastamento de tudo que é de origem fóssil. Depois vamos introduzir muito brevemente o projeto em termos de parceiros, da sua estrutura e dar um pequeno insight no que vamos fazer em termos de biomateriais. Eu agora, dado que o seminário é em inglês, se me permitirem, irei avançar em língua inglesa. Esta apresentação e a que o Mike Redwood vai fazer vão ficar disponíveis em inglês e legendadas em português no nosso canal de YouTube. O contexto que deu origem ao projeto é este. The emissions of greenhouse gases continue to rise, and there is a big possibility that they will exceed the limit established of 1.5 degrees. And these changes are really fueling a variety of social and environmental impacts, giving earthquakes, floods, and so on. So it is fundamental that we stay on pace with 1.5 degrees, according to Paris Agreement. And to this end, we need to move away from a linear pattern of growing consumption of non-renewable fossil resources towards a more sustainable circular living in where we use more, but responsibly, biological resources. These biological resources can be biological per se, like leather, or bio-based materials done by man, but based in bio-resources. This will for certain lead us to reduce emissions, greenhouse emissions, and also our product's footprint, and contribute to reduce climate change. In order to do this, we set as footwear targets the following: really contribute to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions to deliver absolute 50% by 2030, in line with the Paris agreements, going net zero by 2050, and in this way, to proceed like this, we need to go biological and circular. And this is not in terms only of new materials, but also in product design. So footwear manufacturing have also a role and a responsibility, a big one. We need also to manage better and to beat in upcycling of products and wastes. And going bio has a lot to do with that. We can upcycle bio wastes, materials that are now going to landfilling, for example, cereals and so on, and produce new added valued products. This will help reduce the dependency that we have now in non-renewable resources like fossils, and that are increasing in price, and all of us, we are very sensitive nowadays to this problem due to the situation in Europe, and support the creation of a new bioeconomy that will also improve local economies and give local jobs and develop a new era for Europe and the world. So why bioeconomy? Because it really has the potential in footwear of creating materials, components that will reduce our greenhouse emissions and our product environment footprint. It's vital that we reduce footwear and leather bags and leather goods footprint, and this is the way that we can do that. We need therefore to deploy, to generate, to create and deploy the next generation of materials, and in this case we mean bio-leathers, leathers that are 100 or up to 100% biological, also plant-based materials that are really a high percentage of plant material in it. We can also research and synthesize man-based materials, for example, polymers, bio-based polymers for the soles, and again, bet on the recycling. The national project Bioshoes for All is supported by this program, Recuperar Portugal, and it has a specific measure that is addressing bioeconomy. It is promoted by 70 partners from academia to the industry. It is led by APICAPS from Footwear Cluster in Portugal and coordinated by us. I am the project coordinator. The project is founded in 5 pillars: the biomaterials, the ecological footwear, so with reduced environment footprint, and this is reduced and measured according to life cycle analysis methodologies, for example. We bet in circular economy, recycling all our footwear wastes, all our components and material wastes, and also going into the beginning of the circular economy for end-of-life footwear and leather bags. So we would like also to deploy some pilots in which we collect footwear in Portugal and also in Europe, and we upcycle them and really remake new footwears with high quality. So here the object in terms of circular economy is not just to recycle by recycling, is to produce new high added value materials in which we have high quality and we can recycle several times. And to this end, we need new technologies, new chemics, and we want them to be as friendly as possible. The project will also develop new advanced technologies, for example, and processes to make the recycling and to make the production, for example, the production of leather more friendly. And it has a final pillar that is where we are today here in this webinar, that aims training, capacitation, and also dissemination of the project's results. I will give you an insight in the structure. So the 5 pillars involve 11 initiatives, 23 measures, and 80 activities. In this brief insight in Pillar 1, that is related to biomaterials, we propose bio-leathers for footwear and leather goods. And to this end, we will develop new bioproducts that can be used for tanning, retanning, coloring, finishing the leathers. And we will develop new bio-leathers that, for example, recycle leather wastes, that recycle the liquid, the effluent wastes that are to be discarded, and so on. There is another measure in order to develop functionized leathers, so leathers that, apart from being from being up to 100% biological, they have some functionalities. For example, they resist to heat. And then there is another measure, because we are not discarding, or we are we are in favor of a variety of materials. So we want to, that is the diversity of materials that are used in footwear are available in terms of biomaterials. And to this end, we will research and develop new biofibers, prepare new biomaterials with them, and this includes, for example, polyurethanes, adhesives, and also, of course, composite materials for the footwear, upper soles, insoles, and soles. So this second measure will develop and deploy the range of biomaterials that we need for the footwear and leather goods for all the components. I will not go in detail for all the pillars, just mentioning this one because they are quite related. And then finally, the capacitation and promotion. There is a big objective in this project, not just to develop and present, but also to give the partners, give the companies, give the students, give all of you a lot of knowledge of what we are developing. And so, even though the project began quite recently, most of the work beginning 1 July 22, we are already doing promotion, we are already doing training and webinars, and this is the first webinar. The project objectives, as you could already understand, they are a range of materials. I will not go in detail, and you are very welcome to contact us to have more information on this project in the near future. So you are all welcome. Thank you so much, and now I will pass the word to Mike. So Mike, thank you so much for being here. It is really, really a pleasure, and the floor is yours now. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I will just get... my slides ready, and we're going to talk about leather as sustainable. And I've just been listening over the last few days to our Prince William's in Boston, where he was awarding his Earthshoot prizes for the environment. And he used the term hope, optimism, and urgency. And I think in terms of a BioShoes for All project, and from what we've just been hearing about the disappointment of COP27 of not underlining the 1.5 target, urgency really is the word. And as far as the project that you've just heard described in such details is concerned, this is not about business as usual. It's about the need for us all to change our habits, to change the way we do business, and to change the way that we make things. And during the award ceremony, David Beckham was invited to announce one of the prizes, actually, to a seaweed using company that was using the seaweed to replace plastic and packaging, and has already made, I think, about 1 million boxes to prove that it actually works in bulk. And he used the word collaboration, the need for collaboration. And I think that comes across in this project, but I think it also has been coming to light over the last few months as being an essential industrial tool as we go forward into 2023. We have to collaborate more, and the leather industry in all its many parts has to collaborate very much more. It's interesting, we have two words in our title, leather and sustainable, and they're both complex and they're both contested. Leather shouldn't really be contested, but it has been, particularly in the last 2 years, by people adding adjectives like synthetic leather or vegan leather or cactus leather to it, which in many instances is deliberately intended to mislead the consumer or to sell the consumer something pretending that it has the values and the origins of leather. But just last month, the Textile Exchange, which is a body that incorporates a very, very large number of international brands of great importance, agreed to adopt the leather industry's standard and historic definition for leather, one which is an ISO standard and is now an EU standard, which starts with the statement that a hider skin leather has to come from a hide or a skin which is more or less intact and tanned so it doesn't putrefy or rot. And it adds in all the bits and pieces about not being ground up and not having a coating which is too thick, but easily found if you want to look for the precise definition. And I think that is going to help us as an industry clarify what the materials that we're using are. That there is leather, which is a biomaterial, which is a natural organic material. It's not synthesized, it is processed with other materials, but in manufacturing terms, it's called a conditioning process. That's to say the other materials don't add much in weight or in proportion to it. They just condition it so that it does not, as the definition says, does not rot. And we are happy and keen to have biomaterials working along with leather in this project, because the problem that we've been uncovering over the last 20 years has been the increasing quantity of plastics that have been come to use as they've got better and been more aggressively marketed. But we are now identifying that these petromaterials have additional problems for our oceans, for landfills, for biodegradability, and it would be much better if leather was accompanied by good biomaterials to fill a much larger market share. Sustainability has always been a fairly complicated term, and people go to all sorts of dictionaries to write their own definition. But if you look it up, you will see that in all environmental circles and in all environmental training, sustainability goes back to the definition of the Brundtland Commission in 1987. And what she said when she chaired this commission was that the sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And it's got a couple of additional points in that report. And you can read the entire report. Just take the title that I've put on this slide and go into the internet for a search, and you'll get the full report, which is well worth reading, although it's back in 1987 it was written. But the two additions that qualify that basic statement is that we have to put getting people out of poverty as a priority. And in doing so, we must avoid damaging the environment as much as possible, and we must avoid depleting it of further resources. And those are very important points, and they play well into the story of the leather industry, our materials, our processes, and the way that leather is used and the companies it is used by. And at the same time, we're beginning, curiously only now, to think of a circular economy. But the idea of the circularity began, we tend to think it began with the writing of Cradle to Cradle in the 1990s by McConaughey and Brungar, an excellent book. But it actually began, and they acknowledge this, with a prize-winning essay written by Walter Stahel, a Swiss architect, in 1982, called The Product Life Factor. And that was really about, well, I've written there, as he said, the service life extension of goods. But what that really means, it's about using goods for longer, keeping articles longer. And you may remember, some of you, that one of the top designers at Timberland back 10 years ago was saying the best thing that Timberland could do to benefit the planet was to make their shoes last 1 year longer. Because if you can extend the life of shoes, of bags, of other articles, and then particularly if you can repair them, you don't have to go and find new resources, find extra energy, find extra distribution to make and get them into shops. And in that paper, he thought back in 1982 that this would allow some nations to cut their emissions by up to 70%. And he thought and was fairly sure that since robots can't do the work of repair, it would employ 4% of the workforce in keeping those goods in motion. And it would create a new relationship between the consumer and the goods and the materials that make them, and it would save resources and create jobs. And he updated this in 2016 in an article in Nature, again, free online, if you follow the reference at the top of the slide. And he updated his diagram to show the circular economy as explained by Brungart and McEconomy, where you've got at the bottom there in this outer circle, the resources being extracted from the planet to manufacture new goods in the black area, and then they go out on distribution to the consumer. But then two inner loops. And the first is the most important for the leather industry: reuse and repair. And we know that if we look after items and then repair them, leather items are exceptionally good at what we would call longevity, lasting forever. I know some of the shoemakers might be disappointed in hearing this, but I have to admit that my leather welted shoes, of which I have a number of pairs which I rotate, are between 25 and 30 years old, having been resold a number of times. And they last and last. And certainly, I would think that if we make a pair of leather shoes and start to ask consumers to pay 80 or 100 or more euros for them, we ought to be making them so that they can be repaired. And in items, we should be thinking about repair when we manufacture them. For example, in a bag, where is the zip put? Can it be easily accessed for replacement? Because in things like leather bags and often in footwear, it's not the leather that wears out, it's the stitching which goes, or it's a zip which goes, or another accessory. And the better those are, and the better they're done, the longer the article will last, and the less resources we'll need to pull from the planet to replace it. And with many leather items, we don't talk about complete recycling at the end of life, but of repurposing, of using them into other articles. And historically, that was always done. But now we're beginning to see again leather furniture, when it's finished, being repurposed into bags, bags being repurposed into smaller leather items, and other things with specialist companies with a lot of design capability, making things like carpets and wall hangings and ornaments and things, which are really beautiful out of leather pieces rather than sending them to landfill. But leather in landfill, depending on the tanning, will biodegrade between 20 days and 50 years. Plastic in landfill either won't degrade at all or will take at least 500 to 1,000 years. But it does tend to damage when it's treated with salt water. And that's why we've got these marine tiny particles which are causing us so much worry in the environment today. So this concept of leather wearing longer, being relatively easy to maintain, to repair, and to repurpose was the subject of a Leather Naturally poster that was put out for Black Friday a week ago, just to make this identical point that I've been saying. And I think it's a very significant aspect of leather. And you shouldn't be thinking of the circular economy of buying, using, and sending off quickly to be recycled. It's much, much better if you buy less, wear it for a long time, and have it repaired and keep it going. And when you look at our competition, the plastic competition, this is what you will so frequently see. I think both these photos I took in Shanghai airport, certainly the one on the right was taken in the coffee shop of their new terminal 6 months after it was opened. So that coating came straight off and cannot be repaired. Whereas a leather seat gets older, builds character, and looks better with use rather than falling apart. So plastic is a very excellent material, but only when it's used in the right place. And its lifespan in use is very short, but its lifespan in landfill is forever. So we need to keep natural materials and biomaterials in our project. As an example of from a design point of view, somebody sent me the other day this picture of what Clarks have been experimenting with, of a 5-piece shoe that doesn't involve glue, just thread, so it can be fairly easily taken apart at end of life. The polyester laces and the EVA sole are recycled. The EVA, I think, is 51% recycled. But the leather parts are quite large and will be able to be repurposed at end of life. So there is a thought process going on as to what material should we use, how should we design the product, what will end of life look like. And as I just look at one or two other issues with you, that end of life aspect starts to come across. But first, I'd like you to consider the full life, because one of the things that we do know from a sustainability point of view is this fact that a small number of jobs in a tannery regularly creating leather will employ very, very large numbers of people, create many jobs in other industries, which is why leather has been such a huge employer, one of the top 3 employers throughout the last 1,000 years in most countries, and so important in helping pool large numbers of people out of poverty early in the economic development of countries like Korea, Taiwan, China, India, and elsewhere. And I think we're hoping it'll happen in Africa over the next 30 or 40 40 years. But even in France at this time, these are only very approximate figures, of course, because France doesn't retain all its raw material to be used in France. There's lots of imports and exports, and it's got this very strong, very valuable luxury goods trade. But France, in rough terms, has 40 tanneries employing about 1,500 people. But if you take all the shoe factories, glove factories, garment factories, leather goods factories, and some aspects of retail, it has between 100 and 120,000 employees. And the total industry has a turnover of about 25 billion euros, with very sizable exports, and has the attention of their government through that scale and size. But if just look at those figures, 1,500 in the tanneries, 100,000 plus employed in total in the country. That's the place where the sustainability of leather in terms of pulling people out of poverty and keeping people who don't all want to be computer scientists gainfully employed in purposeful work with real career progress, opportunities. Leather is exceptionally good, and without digging deeply into the planet's resources, and with a huge and increasing opportunity for repair. Additionally, you should know that in the EU rules of the product environment footprint category rules, the PEFCs, leather is not a primary reason to keep livestock. People don't keep animals for their skins. And as a result of all their examination, they decided the carbon footprint of husbandry should not be added to that of leather. There's a tiny proportion, around about 0.2%, I think, which comes in. The category rules are quite precise and very easily found if you look for them. And this was a well-considered program which they examined. Doesn't mean that the leather industry is disinterested in livestock. Welfare is very important to it. They don't accept, I don't think we accept, that heavy argument about methane, because the cattle footprint is biogenic, not anthropogenic, and the global livestock populations are running steady at the moment. But there is nevertheless huge opportunity, as we're seeing in California right now, to cut the methane from livestock, which is one way we can help to actually repair the planet. Although cutting methane is going to be very hard if we carry on digging out more coal mines and extracting more gas or throwing more things into landfill. I should also say that whether we like it or not, life cycle analysis are going to be increasingly important, whatever material we use. And because they're expensive, I think we're going to need all the help we can get from our trade associations to get involved, to guide the industry and its participants through how to do these, what the best way, and to do some general ones that everyone can use to discuss with their customers. And in the transition to net zero, which we must all be thinking about, there are 3 early moves that we can immediately start thinking about. One is nothing goes to landfill. I've just said that methane from landfill is a huge problem. The municipal landfill in Iran has just been identified by a new satellite as one of the top 6 super emitters of methane in the world. There's there is a real need for the tanning industry in particular to start making use of more renewable energy, and we should move rapidly to defossilize all of our supply networks. Those 3 early moves as part of a transition to net zero are the ones that we need to start on first. And in the zero to landfill, it raises the question of whether or not we should have chromium in leather. Chromium has been a wonderful tanning material for leather for the last 100 years. We don't use much of it compared to veg tan. It's a fairly available material on the planet. We only use a very small proportion of that which is mined. For the leather industry, most goes into making steel and into paints and other things. And a well-organized tannery can manage it exceedingly well without difficulty. But when you start looking at trimmings from a shoe factory, at end of life of a shoe, at end of life of other articles, as well as some increasing difficulties with sludges and other materials from the tannery, it's becoming too difficult and too costly to collect properly and to extract the chrome. And it's become too easy to take those end-of-life trimmings and recycle them into something which isn't quite suitable for them. And effectively, you're extending that route to landfill while making use of the trimmings in an unsuitable end use for which chromium's not quite suited. So the more I look around and talk with my colleagues, although the uptake of chrome-free leather has been small so far, although veg tanning has been growing in its various forms, including things like olive leather, I do feel and am hearing that the future is going to be in chrome-free leathers, and we are going to have to start embracing it. I accept that it can create some problems in shoemaking if you're working at certain temperatures. I can accept that the different processes can be quite hard for tanners to get used to making, and I accept that there's an increased cost. But when I look at the cost of a shoe, and even the cost of a piece of finished leather, I think that difference in cost is far less significant than we make it out to be. And if we're comparing it with plastic, we're making the wrong comparison, because plastics are not suitable for the future of products that have historically been made from leather. I also think that we have to recognize that chromium started in the 1880s, but never moved to bulk until the 1920s. And it took quite a lot of time to get the oiling right, to get the pre-tanning processes right, to work out how the selection looked and how the yield and area worked out. And it's going to be the same, but very much quicker with the half dozen chromium-free leathers that we currently have on the market. And we need to put some real effort into not telling ourselves how difficult it is to use these, to make or use these chrome-free leathers, but to check out how best to do them, how to dry them, how to retan them, have a really good look at the yields and see how we can start to improve them in the way that we did with chrome tanning 100 years ago. And of course, if you take something like zeolite, for example, it comes from bauxite and sand. They're not rare, expensive materials. They're materials crying out for economies of scale. But to get economies of scale, you need the scale. You need the volumes. And that counts, I think, for nearly all of the chrome-free options. They're all different. They all have their pluses and minuses, and each tannery will have to decide what it wants to work with. And this is where collaboration is needed amongst the tanneries and the tanneries with their customers and the tanneries with their chemical suppliers. Sorry. So anyway, if we all collaborate with our chemical suppliers, I think you might be able to reduce the price by accelerating the move towards those economies of scale. And it emphasizes for me this whole concept, which I think is going to be our theme of 2023, and in your project of bio shoes for all, and that is collaboration. So I've come rather quickly to my end slide, but here we are, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you. You are very, very precise and detailed. Thank you so much for your presentation. Now I will see if we have some questions in the chat. I see that some people, they are thanking you. They are very pleased. I see here some questions, and I myself, I have some. So while I ask all the people, all the persons, all the participantes, I will ask in Portuguese. Muito boa tarde de novo a todos os participantes, muito obrigada pela vossa colaboração. Neste momento vamos abrir um pequeno momento de debate, de questões. Pedíamos a todos, por favor, que se gostassem de interagir, colocassem no chat as vossas questões, no chat ou nas perguntas e respostas. De qualquer forma, já temos aqui algumas anotadas e iremos iniciar com essas. Mike, you mentioned a lot regarding the tanning processes, and one of the main objectives of BioShoes for All is really to move away from chromium tanning. So deploying alternative tannings, mainly based in vegetable sources, either from our leather will be done, for example, with pine tanning, like you mentioned, also could be grape tanning, could be olive tanning. Many other options will be studied. But companies are always putting us these questions. Is these materials, the already existing and future alternative bio leathers, will also be as performant as shoe requires and as leather requires for leather bags? What do you think that the vegetable alternatives we can produce the footwear as we already do, or are you anticipating that we need to change the process? In some trials that we do, there are almost similar conditions, but what is your insight on this topic of how will you use leather? Is it easy or have to change a lot?
Well, I think if we move to vegetable tanning, it can be achieved. vegetable tanning, I think they've advanced the process very greatly in the last 20 years. And I think in bags, of course, it's been coming back very quickly. In many ways, in things like bags, it's a preferable material because the patina is so beautiful, and you can have something which develops its own character. So the beautiful thing about I think about a vegetable leather bag is that you can have two identical bags and you give them to two different people, but after a month you've got two different bags because they've personalized by the way they've been handled, by what's put into them. And increasingly I find I'm buying vegetable tan shoes. Styles like hand-sewn mocks, or styles somewhat like that Clark shoes that we saw, but made in vegetable tanned leathers, because you can get them thinner and soft. And I think most of the tanneries that I work with around the world have lines of vegetable tanned footwear leather. The problem is if you want to do certain types of shoemaking that involve very high temperature, and you've got to be exceptionally skilled to be able to work that machinery to get round. And I don't think you're ever going to get vegetable tanned leather, or actually many of the biomaterials that will stand the 100 degrees centigrade that chromium leather is concerned. If you go on then to biomaterials, up until the present, I would say the biomaterials in terms of durability are very poor indeed. The performance of leather in terms of physical resistance, chemical resistance, so on, is at the top. And of course, when Filk did their study of all of them, they found that in order to meet the basic requirements to make a shoe or to make a seat, they had to be loaded with quite a lot of polyurethane and other chemicals, quite often up to and above 50%. Not just a surface coating that we might put on leather, but to strengthen the whole structure. Some are moving to biopolyurethane, which of course is what the leather industry is doing with its finish, and others are looking to other routes. So I think it's only a matter of time before they will get better, but they're a long way off at the moment. And my hope is that perhaps the tanners will help them, and not be afraid to get involved and help.
In our project, Bioshoes for All, we have 12 tanners collaborating. And we have another 12 footwear companies also collaborating among them, and with tanneries, and so on for sole manufacturers, and 20 research institutions. So I believe that we have the necessary critical mass and knowledge to deploy these products, but your support and your help is also very welcome. One aspect that the companies always raise is about the price. You mentioned it very quickly, but when we look at the processes for alternative leathers, alternative to chromium, we see that maybe there is a potential small increase in price, but there is not to be expected a huge increase in price. So what would you, in your experience, long time experience, would be really a possible increase in price when we move away from chromium tanned leather to alternative vegetable or alternative tanned leathers? Is it justifiable to have big increases, or can we count with, let's say, reasonable?
you've got to think that the cost of a finished leather is approximately 50% raw material. And that other 50% is overheads, labor, and chemicals. Okay. And in the chemicals, the tanning is only one very small part. So when you're looking at a leather that's, I don't know, €3 a square foot, the chemical element is quite small. And even if you were to double all of the chemicals, it doesn't really make a huge difference to the price of the price of the leather. And I'm very convinced from what I'm hearing that although certainly for the time being, the cost of a chromium tan leather, just the chromium, compared to the others, is considerably cheaper in terms of the cost, say, per square foot of just that tiny part of the process. When you look, I think the style wet white doesn't require a full beam house process. I think the Nera zeolite doesn't require nearly as much retanning, although all are in the early stage of proving. There's quite a lot argue that you get much better looking grain and a much better yield. So you've got fewer rejects to deal with and a better cutting surface for a shoemaker. There's some who say that you get a better area, particularly if you start to adjust the drying. But I think we need much, much higher volumes out there being made, and much more serious experimentation and much more collaborative discussion going on as to what's being seen, getting the feedback back to the chemical companies so they can share it out and we can all benefit. Then we'll start to see the price come down, as well as the economies of scale that we've had now for 100 years with chromium. So I just don't feel for a second we should worry about the price. Because if you look, we've got this awful thing from Proposition 65 in California, which is chasing everyone that's got chromium in the, and it's a money-making scheme, using tests to try and find chromium-6, even if it's not there. We've got pressure to get the 3 ppm down to the 1 ppm. I think that's almost gone through, but we don't have a test that accurately measures low 3 ppm. It's nonsensical. So if you begin to think about it, the life for a chromium leather maker is going to become impossible. Yeah,
that's why we are anticipating this in order to prevent the chromium cyst, prevent all these aspects, and also because of recycling. Even though in your presentation talked significantly about repair and refurbishing, there are also trends in the market and requests for recycling. If we cannot refurbish, if we cannot reuse, we would like to recycle. And in this case, if you have chromium inside the leather, it is very, very difficult to recycle it. And that's also a reason to go for vegetable and other alternatives.
Yep, I would support that.
You would support that. I would like to see if we have more questions. Yes. Okay. A colleague is in the chat is putting the question relating the relative resistance of the leather, the forelining, comparing vegetable tanning and another other agents, because if the reticulation is assuming or asking if due to less reticulations of collagen when you are tanning with the vegetable agents, if the physical properties of linings could be compromised.
Well, I'm very much in favor of a vegetable lining and footbed in a shoe. For the sake of health and comfort.
Yes.
But I do think that we need to talk to our vegetable tanners to try and find ways to improve perspiration resistance and the wet rub impact, because those linings get very wet and they do wear out. I certainly accept that. It might be that some of the wet white tannages will give better perspiration resistance and give the same level of absorption and perspiration reservoir as a veg tan does. And I think that's a very valid research project to look for. And I'm just not expert enough in all these chrome-free processes to know. And I'm not 100% convinced that all of the producers have done that sort of work yet. I think that is still a work in process, which we need to encourage because it's incredibly important, because I think this comfort in footwear is absolutely essential. And the more leather you put in the shoe, the better it is, because I worked with Echo until 2003. And when I left in 2003, I went to their factory shop and bought a lot of pairs. And when lockdown started 2 years ago, I discovered I had a lot of pairs of old Echo shoes. And I decided, since I was stuck in our village, we would go walking and walking and walking, and I would use these shoes. And what I discovered is the more leather they had, the better they lasted. It was the bits of plastic in them that were disintegrating. And some were such a disappointment. Almost new shoes, one wear, and they started falling apart.
Yeah, that is the sole, when you certain materials using the sole have that problem. But leather for certain not has. So like that. And yes, thank you so much also for this insight in this question, and thank you for the participant to put it. Is really an interesting question, and but frequently here we lost to open the situation that we are talking about vegetable, but many times these materials can be retanned with a complementary tanning agent, and in this way the lining could be could have improved properties. And it is a very good suggestion from Mike that we research further on this, and I am so sure that we will follow your recommendation. So thank you, Mike. Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure, really interesting. I hope that we count on you. And I'd like to let you say the last words. Thank you so much, all the audience. Thank you, Mikey. And please let us know something about Leather Natural if you can. So to do that, and your last words. Thank you.
Well, I really love Leather Naturally. Obviously, I helped over many years to get it going, but in these last 3 years since I've stepped back, they've produced some absolutely outstanding educational material. It's material that is very, very carefully written to be scientifically correct, to be utterly reliable. Their book on manufacturing leather, which is available in many languages and can be printed out and handed to customers or handed to school children and used on trade stands, just magnificent. And the leather industry needs this huge bank of material to help ensure that those that don't like leather don't win the argument about materials. We need honesty, we need integrity, we need great material. And leather naturally could keep doing this, both producing this data and being able to promote it, needs us all to join in. And I think they've changed the membership fees so that every tannery now can afford to join, and it doesn't cost that much. And I would highly recommend it, because the more I see the landscape of the lobbying and attacks that are going on around the world, and the fact that our young people are increasingly divorced from agriculture and the knowledge of where materials come from, they need help, education, and to be introduced to a beautiful material that lasts, is natural, and will always be available for as long as we eat meat and drink milk. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. Muito obrigada a todas, muito obrigada ao Mike, muito obrigada a todos os participantes. Contem connosco, todas as informações que desejarem, por favor, contactem-nos. Os vídeos vão ficar disponíveis no YouTube e relativamente ao projeto e próximas a essa informação, não hesitem em contactar-nos. Boa tarde a todos, muito obrigada. Bye.